Welcome to the Bourbon Talk Show, the ABV Network's original YouTube series where we interview some of the most interesting people from the world of bourbon. Today on the show, we'll be talking to Freddie Johnson of Buffalo Trace. My name is McNew. Please join me in welcoming our host for the evening, Steve Igley.
Hey, gang, what's up?
Hey,
Hey, hey, thank you. We've got a fun show. We're talking to Freddie Johnson today. This is no mistake. Freddie was saved for the big finale. So Freddie, we're gonna have you on the big finale here. So it's cool. He's the only guest we booked for tonight. So the rest of those of you that have been following along, we always did two guests. Freddie, we're just doing this one just on you tonight, my friend. So it should be fun.
Well, they must have done something pretty bad, Steve, to be stuck with me at the end. I don't know.
I don't see it that way at all, my friend. But we'll get to Freddie in just a second here. Before we do that, we do a little segment called Bourbon News. Sometimes it's our personal news, sometimes it's industry news. Our first story is definitely personal. It's this is our final episode of the year, and I just wanted to update the audience what happens next. So the show is done. We committed to doing 10 episodes. We announced last week we're going to be coming back in September. So McNew will be back doing this again, which is very cool. We're going to take a couple of weeks off, and then McNew and I will get in the studio, and we will take our interviews that we've done for those 10 shows, and we're going to turn them into a podcast. And we'll do some behind the scenes stuff. You know, what was it like? You know, talking to Freddie. How were we nervous? Was it fun? So we'll give some little bit behind the scenes and just cut out all the show, the talk show, other than the actual interview. So it'll be a thing that we do. So that'll be coming up in July. So July 19th and 26th, the weeks of, so Monday through Friday. So 2 weeks of the Bourbon Daily will be, our talk show interviews, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah, and it's then, like a VH1 behind the music, except it's
exactly. It's us. So, and then we'll have to decide, what we want to do for the fall. We'll have to start extending invitation to potential guests. And McNew, you and I'll have to talk too. I mean, this show was inspired by early Carson, and I'm talking about Johnny Carson before I was old enough to watch it live, way before McNew's time. But those old shows where they do it almost like it was live. It wasn't live broadcast, but it was live recorded. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to do that exact same thing. And then what do you do in season 2? Do you get all new guests? Do you bring back a couple? Because that was one of the cool things about Carson. If you watch Johnny Carson, if there was a favorite guest, they'd be back again and again. So I'm thinking maybe we lean towards that. We have mostly new guests, but bring back a couple of favorites. And each season there's some continuity.
So. Yeah. I think some favorites, a couple of new ones. I would love to see Lisa Wicker. I hope we get her for season 2.
Yeah. We'll talk about who we want to target, and if Lisa's one you want to get, absolutely. And I'm sure Lisa would come on too. So that's a good one to have on our list. So we'll get together, and so that's what we're doing next. We'll start recording again on Thursday, September 2nd, and then of course shows get released the next day. So Friday, September 3rd will be when the first episode comes out, and then it's a 10-week run. Then we'll do 10 more episodes. That'll be season 2. So there you go. Story number 2, Evan Williams has been redesigned. I don't know if you saw the new bottle, McNew. Did you check that one out at all?
I saw the email come through today, but I honestly did not open it. I haven't seen it yet.
Okay. I thought I have one. I thought I had it here, but now I don't see it. So I was going to show the audience, but I do have one. I think that's one worth revisiting. Even in the press release, it said it was kind of a hidden gem. So what a hidden gem means is not enough people are buying it, really. And right. They upped the proof. They went from 86 to 90, and the redesigned bottle. I think that's probably worth revisiting that one again, don't you, McNew? Because it's a value.
Yeah, and I've been a fan of Evan Williams. I like Evan Williams in cocktails because I don't feel bad about like, oh, I wasted this bottle. Not that it's a waste to make it in a cocktail, but I like some Evan Williams, and I love that they upped the proof. So I think that's going to be good for them and people buying it.
Up the proof. Check it out. $19.99 suggested retail price. So look for it in your liquor stores. That redesigned bottle will be out cool, and it's a good look. It's very streamlined, cool. It looks very modern, so I like it. Mm-hmm. All right, our third and final story. This is a good one here because I think we can get some insight into this one, McNew. So I don't know if you saw this, but Colonel E.H. Taylor brand team announced a new special release. So it's called Warehouse C. And apparently this was Colonel Taylor's favorite warehouse. He commissioned a couple of lithographs of that particular warehouse for a book that he had done. And this is a 10-year-old whiskey that is pulled from the 2nd and 5th floors. So Freddie, do you know anything about this one? Is that kind of the sweet spot in the warehouse, the 2nd and 5th floors?
Yeah, well, what they did was they took advantage of 2 aging characteristics. So Fred's there here, but so a 5th floor, you're going to get a lot more of the effects of the temperature fluctuations.
Right.
And a little bit of heat. So this is going to move the whiskey in and out of the wood. So fifth floor is kind of active. Second floor, you're more stable. It's a drier environment, and it's influenced more by barometric pressure. So you're getting the spiciness associated with the upper floors, and you're getting the smoother mellow taste from the lower floors. And when you put those two together, it's just a dynamite combination. It is really quite good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's certainly one of the neat things about Buffalo Trace is you think about a warehouse that's still standing from Colonel E.H. Taylor's time. It almost feels like, if somebody's that far, before you were even born, it almost feels like everybody's in the same group. Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Colonel E.H. Taylor. But in reality, he was alive in the same century that I was born, which is interesting. And the fact, you've got a warehouse that was his particular favorite. You always feel the spirit of the guy. And Freddie, it has to be, totally different. Not only feel the historical characters, but the family characters that you have associated with the brand and that distillery. So.
I'll tell you something kind of crazy. We'll have to go on a journey the next time you pop down to Buffalo Trace.
Mm-hmm.
And we can visit those two floors.
Okay.
It is amazing the difference in the atmosphere, just the way it feels, the way it smells, the way the air moves around you. It has a lot of windows in it, but it's based on the rotation of the earth. So that's what's cool about it. So we talk a lot about Warehouse C gives you a chance to see what they were really doing. Normally the warehouses were like, the gift shop was actually a warehouse at one time, built in the same period of time. But it's a ranch style design, kind of like what they would do over in Scotland and Ireland. So when he came in with, I'll call it a high rise warehouse, it was setting the trend for the industry and for this part of Kentucky. But that's where most of his structures are. If you notice that just about all the distilleries, he had multiple levels rather than just one level.
Yeah.
And he was taking advantage of the lower levels as well as the upper levels with the temperatures. And it was really, he was ahead of his time. That's the easiest way to say it. But he did something that I think is exceptional. He spent a heck of a lot of money on these buildings, like not only Buffalo Trace, but Castle and Key are two of the landmarks, but all of these old distilleries like Old Grandad, you look at Pepper, you look at any of these that are brick, mortar, and stone, those were influenced by Taylor because he had stumbled upon something. It was the ability to control the climate. So when you visit Buffalo Trace, if you park, where you park your car is the south side of the building.
Yeah.
And the sun gently sweeps the barrels on that side. But when you look at the face on the entry into Warehouse C, that's the west side of the building. And if you look closely at the brick, you'll notice something. The discoloration on the brick actually changes from the south side to the west side where the sun sets. And then if you go to the north side, that's the side that everybody thinks that the building had a fire. But that's the north side, the sun never shines directly on the barrels. So the temperature is lower, there's no radiant heat, moisture level is higher, and it creates a unique aging environment for the barrels on that side of the building.
Yeah.
And he did that. So It's crazy.
It is. It absolutely is. So our first guest, obviously we just heard from him, and, this is the type of knowledge that he brings. It's unbelievable. He's one of the most beloved individuals in the world of bourbon today. His job title is tour guide, but he means so much more to everyone who loves bourbon than that. I say, he's just a great person. So ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Freddie Johnson. Hey, Freddie.
Hey.
Yes. So Freddie, I got to start this out with just getting, personal, in that you're like a person that I've never met before. There's no one else like you. I tell you what, the first time that we ever talked and did an interview was an interview for the Bourbon Show, and Jeremy and I think it might have been Renee and I can't remember who the three of us were that were interviewing you, but it might have been Tracy Napolitano. He was with us. So it was the three of us. And we were interviewing you, and you started talking about your father. And I couldn't believe it. The things you were saying about your dad reminded me of my feelings for my dad. And I'm crying on our podcast. And you know what? And I thought, this is strange, but then it seems like every time we get together, at some point I'm weeping because you're just so raw the way you talk about things. You're so real. You just have a great way of orating these things, and it's just really touching how you are. And I don't think when most people go to a distillery to take a tour, they think about, you know, being in touch with feelings or thinking about their loved ones and stuff like that. But you bring that, and how unique is that? And how often do you see someone on a tour crying?
I don't know, but you remember we had this thing with Royce Neely,
Mhm. Yeah.
and it happened to him.
Hmm.
So, and that was one of that letter that Susan Austin wrote to him, thanking him for what he did for her father. I guess he was what, 95 years old.
95 years old, came to visit. And Susan, you know, it's just another tour. In reality, it's what Neely does, and Royce is on here, but you know, it's what Neely family does. And you know what, you don't even realize the impact. There's a gentleman, it turns out he's 95. Royce doesn't know this at the time. He knows it's an elderly gentleman in a wheelchair, but it ends up being kind of the last hurrah. It was just happened in April. And you know, Royce doesn't know the family or anything like that. It's just visitors to the distillery, but you know, they had a good time. His staff interacted with the family, and her father just had this amazing time at Royce's distillery. And she wrote him a note saying, "Hey, I just want to let you know that was really one of our last great moments with my father. And he had such a good time." And he talked about that in his last few weeks. And how big is that bourbon can do something like that?
I'll tell you what's cool. So I feel good when I hear someone else doing the kinds of things that happen, and that's being personal.
Mhm.
And taking the time to not give someone a canned tour, but recognizing the fragile state and just slowing the pace down and letting them look beyond the obvious and creating a memory. So I always share with Steve, it's kind of like when I start my tours, I tell folks all the time, I said, you know, I said, there are a couple of unspoken rules that we never talk about, but when I mention these, you're going to start chuckling to yourself and you'll realize it's very true. So the first one is this. Have you ever thought about this? You will never, ever bring out your good stuff with people you don't like.
Exactly.
If I don't like you, I won't even tell you I got it. Like Mr. Bill. Mr. Bill will turn that arsenal around so people can't see, because he doesn't want people asking for any of that good stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first.
I went over to his house, Freddie, and he stapled a sheet up to the ceiling, just covering that. I didn't know what was behind there. Now I know. Now that I'm here on the video, I know what was behind that sheet.
Oh, okay. So that's your first unspoken rule. You never bring out your good stuff with people you don't like. And the other unspoken rule is this. If I do bring one of those bottles out, you are obligated to listen to what I went through to get it before I pour you a drink. So the kicker is there is always a story that goes with a good bottle of bourbon.
Oh yeah.
And that story, believe it or not, that's the conduit. That's the conduit that sets the stage for you sitting down and spending time with someone you truly enjoy being with.
Yeah.
And that's the crazy part about it. But I will only do that with someone I enjoy being with.
Yeah.
And at that point, time is not a factor. So I call it time in a bottle, because if you think about the time that it took to produce that product, you realize, my goodness gracious, this is just a brief snippet in time of something that may have taken 30 years to create.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's kind of funny. So you sit there and we'll sit there and we'll laugh and tell stories and we'll have a ball. I'm going to say it this way. I'm at Bourbon on Rye one evening, and there happens to be another young man on this on this Zoom event with us. But Barry, so we get to sipping, and all of a sudden time is not a factor, and we're talking and we're laughing. We bumped into each other at a couple of different locations, and what Barry knows, we just did an event, and Fred was there, and the good thing is that after it's over, you can always tell when people are having a good time, because even after the event is over, people aren't ready to leave. And you
Right.
sit around, you continue to chat. We share things. I have Royce's bottle that I told you, Steve. Remember, you guys signed it.
Yep. Mhm.
And I told you, I'm trying to hold off till Osiris is 21, but I may not make it. So it's calling me every time I open up my little closet. There it is, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try to do this. But we have memories, and we have moments, and I just look at this, and I look at what each of you do, and if you think about the number of folks that you've sat down and you've had a good drink with, and you realize how important that was. I can remember Fred, when Fred came in, and Fred was going down to what'd you call it? The garden, the gazebo, right, Fred?
Yeah, the gazebo in Bardstown. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And you think about moments like that, and you think about people bringing out a good bottle, and they share, and you create bonds. I personally, the craziest thing that ever happened to me was Steve. And when I tell you this is so crazy. So Steve and I hook up, and we start talking, and we start having a good time. We start doing things. And I was at this event, and I think we were at the horse park.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
Steve was in the back. It was the bikers run, or
Yeah, the Bourbon Country Burn. Yeah.
Bourbon Country Burn. And we're sitting there talking to this group, and Steve is in the background. And I recognized him, and I made sure everyone else recognized him. And it brought back a memory of when we were at the Bourbon Hall of Fame, and what Steve had done to make that happen. And he's at the table with my daughter and Dr. Ridgel, who's passed away now. He was my dad's good buddy. And AJ was at our table. The deal was this: when I had AJ talking to him about Steve, I said, now look at the two of us. And I said, now if we were out walking down the street together, people would wonder, what in the world is going on with these two guys? So it's perception.
Yeah.
So I mean, you look at Steve, and you look at me, and you go like, what do those two crazy looking guys have in common?
Right.
And the bond is beyond the obvious. So I just always share with people, look beyond the obvious. Just look beyond the obvious. When you sit down with somebody to have a pour, look beyond the obvious. Look beyond why you're pouring, and think about what it's all about. Okay. It'll cause you to rethink everything about that moment. It's amazing. One of the most touching moments I've ever had in my life was with Lincoln Henderson. And it was at an event, and it was between takes. And he just had this, like a look, he was like looking off somewhere. And I just said, are you okay? And he said, oh yeah, Freddie, I'm fine. And I said, well, what's up? He said, I was just thinking about sharing something with you. And I was like, okay. And he said, I've made a product, and I was just sitting here, and we've been talking, and I was thinking about you and your dad and your grandfather. And he says, I've made a product that I'll probably never live to taste. And I said, oh, really? And he says, but if you get a chance to get some of it, he said, I promise you, you're going to really like it. It's going to be really quite good. And it just made me, I looked at him, and we talked some more. And that was Angel's Envy in the sherry and port barrels.
Yep.
And here's a guy who's created something, and just like H. Taylor and these other guys, it was a vision. It was something that they had a passion about. They knew it would be a good product, but they also knew that I have to spend the time. I have to let Mother Nature and Father Time work their magic. And I hope that they appreciate what I've created, because I'll never live to taste it myself. And I'm thinking, all of these old guys that we've come to think of their products as the ones we want to go for, you know. And a lot of the stuff, their third release, when they really were getting into the group, none of them ever got to taste what we are enjoying today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the legacy, and that's what's cool about all of this. So as a kid, I was fascinated with Buffalo Trace. At the time, it was Ancient Age Stag Distillery. But the chemistry, the mechanics, structures, just the whole thing, when you look at the bottle, when you just look at a bottle of bourbon, any bottle from any distillery, it's not just liquid in a bottle. Unless you really get into this, you don't really appreciate the craft that goes into a really good bottle. It's just, it'll blow you away. It'll blow you away. So but anyway, yeah, Lincoln popped into my head because I was thinking about you and your dad, and I was thinking about what Royce had done with that old guy. And that's the generation that we're not too far behind.
Right.
And so one day I hope for me that if I'm on my bucket list, which I'm already on for some things, but I hope that at some point in my life, if I'm able to go to a site and a distillery that I really want to go to, I hope that I stumble upon someone like Royce, or I stumble upon a Steve. Okay, I stumble upon a Barry. You begin to get the picture.
Right.
Those are the folks that make this industry what it is. Stumble upon a Fred. You know, it's just a cool thing. So I don't want to get caught up on that, but I just started looking at things differently.
Yeah, you do as you get older. And Royce is such a young guy. He's not even 30 yet. But I think this had an impact on him. It's crazy, right? He's not even 30. He's been doing this for years. He's not even 30 yet. It's coming soon, though. It's looming large. It's coming next month. So he can't say that anymore very soon. But Royce, just tell us real quick the impact that had on you. This literally just came in, and you get this note. And again, there's always, you're in a great business, but there's bad days in this business. There's days when it sucks. There's days when it feels like just a regular job. But you get a moment like that, it changes you, doesn't it?
Yeah, I actually got the email. I guess the lady had wrote it last night about 10 o'clock. Rebecca was already in bed, and I screenshotted it and sent it to her. It was her and Tony Manchella, who was also there with me at the time. So, it kind of touched me last night when I read it, because you lose perspective a lot of times at the impact you can actually have on people. And it's a kind of a special thing. And I was really happy. I remember the old man really well. He had a World War II veteran hat on. And that's what really sparked my conversation with him, because, I get along really well with Rebecca's grandfather. And so I brought him over, and he was telling us stories about him chasing Erwin Rommel through Africa. It was neat. And we went through the distillery, and he worked for WCPO for years, and they had come down and done interviews on us for National Moonshiners Day. So it was just, we shared a connection, and I was really happy that, we could be a part of that and then provide that for that family, because, like she said, that was the last real time they got to spend a moment with their father.
Yeah. Yeah. You gave her a heck of a gift, but she gave you a heck of a gift by letting you know that. I mean, that's really, really nice of her to send that email and let you know, how important that was to the family. So very cool thing.
And another thing too, a lot of times, like you said, Steve, in this industry, it's easy to focus on the negatives all the time. You get 100 great reviews and you focus on the one bad one. And I get that, because it does drive progress and it helps to build a company. But, you kind of got to just take a step back sometimes and realize, that that's the stuff you're appreciative of, is getting an email like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Freddie, next time we get together, we got to talk Lincoln Henderson, though. I'm just such a big fan of him. And I don't know of anybody who's had that impact in the last 20 years or something I mean, you think about finishing bourbons. I know he worked on that a long time. There's stories about him working on this even back in his days at Brown-Forman. And then how many distilleries do that now? It's like a major thing in the industry at this point.
Yep. And that was what I mean, he was ahead of his time.
Mhm.
And so basically they were kind of like, well, this is, you need to move on out of the way because this is not the direction we're going, because they didn't realize what he had actually created.
Right.
But I mean, Elmer went through the same thing with Blanton's.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, because he almost lost his job over when he had that bottle design from Anchor Hocking and had the little molded metal top on it and the wax and the calligraphy with all labor intensive and when the board questioned him, they said, all right, well, based on this, that it looks nice and all of that, but what's your price point on this to give us a decent return on the investment? And he says, well, I figure we can price it around $25 a bottle. That ought to be pretty good. And they said, what? What on earth makes you think anybody's going to pay $25 for a bottle of bourbon? Now they're paying $25,000 for a bottle
Oh
of bourbon.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's so emotionally shook Elmer up that Elmer put cases of whiskey in his car and would drive around the country doing on-premise tastings in bars, restaurants, anywhere that they would let him do a pour so that he could talk up Blanton's. It's amazing. He did that. That was his personal commitment to how much he believed in that, just like Lincoln.
Yep.
I every now and then, it used to be when we were doing a lot of these events and stuff, I would get a chance to talk to Jimmy Russell. And Jimmy's like the last one of that, kind of like of that breed.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's floating around out there. To me, the folks in the industry that have had the most impact have been the quietest.
Mm-hmm.
You just think about that when you go to some of these distilleries. If you ever spend time with these folks, you would never know who they were or all the things that they have been through unless you sit down and just chat with them a little bit without rushing them.
Right.
You know, it's amazing. But,
So, Freddie, I want to do an interview that's different than any one that you've done before, because you do so many of these things. I want to ask you a couple different questions, and so the first one
Okay.
is, I think everybody who's new to bourbon, assumes that you've been doing this your whole career. Or they've heard the story about your father, but it seems like that's really all you've done. But you had a whole career before this. Tell us a little bit about your job before you ever came to Buffalo Trace.
I was the kid that doodled. I was a doodler in school. I got bored very easily. And it started with, which is why I like to do tours with kids in middle school, high school, first couple of years of college. The deal was this: a field service agent. I'd done some experiments and I created something. And this field service agent said, you ought to join the 4-H club because I think that this is really pretty cool what you've done. And how did you learn how to do that? And I said, well, it just makes sense that when you do this kinds of things, this is what's going to happen. And she said, you need to join the 4-H club. Well, I was thinking 4-H club's old country bumpkin. And the school I was going to, they were called, there were specific schools. It was called Rosenwald schools. And Dr. Rosenwald had a theory that if I take inner city kids and expose them to cultures and to things that they would normally not see in their community or in their school, those folks are really kind of smart, but unless you put that smartness in the right direction, usually it turns bad and they get stuck in where they are. And I got exposed to that, and that caused me to create this project. So I joined the 4-H club just because it was going to be in a contest, and it was a local contest, and it won. And then we entered it in the district, and it won. And then it went to the division, and it won. And it went to regional, and it won. And the next thing I know, she said, well, guess what? You're on your way to Washington, D.C. And I'm like, I'm a little country bumpkin. I'm like, what? And they said, yep, you're going to get to go to the Smithsonian Institute. You're going to get a chance to meet the president, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what? So that opened my eyes. And I got a chance to see live theater performances. I got a chance to see all the cool stuff in the Smithsonian. Wished I could have stayed longer. Stayed at Howard University there. But because of that, just because of that, Steve, I had this crazy knack of taking techie things and specs and saying them in ways that made sense to just talking to people every day. And AT&T was looking for, they were looking for folks because they were doing this recruiting drive because they were having trouble meeting customers' demand in a quick enough turnaround time.
Right.
And engineering was over running the budget. It was a kind of a bad news scene. So I got recruited on this program, and it was an accelerated program. So I was at they would send me to schools, like I would go down to University of Georgia. I went to Georgia Tech. I went to University of Michigan. I was at Harvard with Dr. Max Kostick, all kinds of crazy stuff. I never even knew what was going on. Got I got a top secret security clearance, did underground military sites for the military, Air Force One. I was in the Network Operations Control Center in 6th Avenue in New York. And it's just, I was just in a world that started with me playing at Buffalo Trace Distillery, tinkering with stuff. And I realized how many other kids could have that same experience if we give them a chance to do it.
Right.
So it was just crazy. So that was the start of my life. And, it ends up, my dad is really proud of me, but it was the only reason why that happened was because the bourbon industry had gone dead. So 60s to the 90s, bourbon was no big deal. The warehouses were full of whiskey. Shinley was laying off everybody. There were only like 50 people left there when Buffalo Trace got purchased by the Sazerac Company. So my dad had wanted me to work at the distillery. He was very happy that I got another job, by the way. I think he thought I was going to be around the house forever. But because of that, when I started moving around the country, he really got concerned that I would not work at the distillery. So he just said, well, make me a promise, old man. And I said, what's it, Dad? He says, if you get a chance during my lifetime, would you work at the distillery for a little while? Just so I can tell everybody we had 3 generations to work at Buffalo. Right? So so life is a journey, as you know. And I said, sure, Dad. I said, I'll be glad to do that. So he said, and by the way, he said, if anything ever happens to me, will you be my caregiver? Well, sure, Dad. How many of you are going to tell your father you won't take care of him when they ask you, will you take care of him?
Right.
So I said, sure, Dad, I'll take care of you. Yeah. Well, I didn't understand what I was committing to. Caregiving is more than just, giving your father a drink of water or wiping their mouths when they drool. It's a lot more. And so what happened behind that was I started working at Buffalo Trace Distillery, and I began to get an appreciation for what it really means to be committed to something, what longevity and legacies and integrity and all this stuff was all about. And I realized that it was more than just a promise that I was making to my dad. And even though I was only going to stay for 1 year, that's now been almost 20 years.
Yeah.
And I've learned along the way. So I actually found myself when I committed to take early retirement and come back to take care of my dad and work at Buffalo Trace. A busy day at Buffalo Trace was maybe 50 people. That was a busy day.
Yeah.
And now Fred's on here with me. He can attest to it. Now, we can run through it. Sometimes we'll run through 1,000 people a day.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden you go like, wait a minute. Maybe, just maybe, I'm looking at this the wrong way. So I found out if I turn this around and I look at the folks coming to the distillery, I look at life. I look at the good part of life. I look at the fun part of life because you very seldom ever get someone in a bad mood coming to your distillery.
Yep.
I mean, Stephanie knows what I'm talking about. They are already excited. They're happy. They're pumped. And all they want to do is have you take them to the next level. And they'll do some of the darndest things. They'll say some of the darndest things, but they'll get to laughing. And that's when you realize, yep, that's what this is all about. It's really about.
It's like
having
people
fun. Yes, sir.
make their vacations distillery tours. It's people having a good time. Like you can't have a bad day there.
No. But see, that's the deal. I mean, if you think about what Barry's doing with Tar, okay, you think about what Royce is doing, okay, you start putting all these pieces together at these different distilleries, and you realize folks are looking forward to your distillery. They're looking forward to going to another distillery. They're looking forward to going down to talk to Caleb and those folks. You know, it's just, I mean, it's just the distilleries have opened up. And that's what's exciting. What I look at, it's like when they ask you about a distillery is you go like, well, wait, I've never heard of that one. And you realize these suckers are popping up everywhere. And how do you know what's a good bourbon, what's bad bourbon? But that's where you come in, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what you and Stephanie are doing, that's the catalyst that gets people excited about wanting to do all this stuff. So that's what I'm pumped about. And I'm like, you know, I'm going to be one of these little farts that sits around and I'll be trying to get my trying to get my earbuds in, what they call them, earbuds or whatever those things are.
Yeah.
And, you know, trying to get my camera all straightened out in my room because I'll be in a rocking chair, but I'll still be sipping bourbon. So, so you got to keep doing what you're doing to make it enjoyable for everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Freddie, when I go over to my mom's house, and they bought the house that my mom still lives in, of course, my dad's passed away, but they still have the same house. They moved in there 3 months before I was born, and that's the house that you know, they've always had. We never moved, we never family moved or anything like that. And when I go to that house, there's so many memories there. You know, you remember funny things, or I go to my old room. My room is still my room. My mom has a desk in there. It's her office now. That's still my room, you know, but for you, the distillery was like your playground. Does it feel like home to you? As you're walking around and giving a tour, does all of a sudden something hit you? It's like, boy, you know,
yeah.
I remember doing this here or that here. I assume that happens, right?
Yeah. So before we started all this construction, my fondest memory was the first time that it was actually we were fishing behind the distillery underneath the dry house. So if you've been to Buffalo Trace, these big dryers that we dry the mash in after it comes off the still, converting it to livestock feed. It used to be they would when they rinsed out the vats and stuff, that mash would go out into the river and the fish would hang around up in that area. So you go up in there and fish. So I was up in there fishing with my granddad and my dad, and I was getting bored. And so I saw this ladder, and I saw the opening. I went over and looked, and I said, "Oh, this is interesting." So I climbed up the ladder, and it's an opening in the floor, and it was a way that the workers could go downstairs and look underneath to make sure, check on the river, and make sure the pumps and stuff are working okay. And so I'm climbing up this ladder and I'm looking at these big rollers, these big tumbler dryers and all this noise and stuff. And here's this opening in the floor. And as I come up the ladder, I look like a little, like a groundhog, a little gopher, sticking my head up out of the floor. And I looked around, and one of the workers, Paul comes over and he looks down at me, and I'm looking up at him, and he said, "Well," he said, "you must be Jimmy Johnson's boy." And I'm like, "How did he know that?" And so he said, "Come on up." And that, the mechanics, if you ever get into that room, if we are able to open it back up after COVID clears out, it's fascinating to go in there and see how those big dryers work. And you get the rumbling, and then you see how it comes out, and you get a chance to go into the other parts where they store the dried mash and the grain and stuff. It's just fascinating. So I had the opportunity to put another piece of this thing together. But at the time, when I go back through there and look, I try to imagine what I must have looked like sticking my head up
Right.
out of this hole in the floor, and this guy just looking down at me like, well, you're Jimmy Johnson's boy, aren't you? I'm like, oh, jeez. So, but yeah, so that's what I do around there. I used to play in the record in the warehouses. We can't do that kind of stuff today, but the documentary Neat, that was the reason for me talking about my dad and the last bottle that we had together.
Yeah.
And it was all because I used to play in there, and my dad and my granddad were worried that I would bump one of those old barrels. Some of them were just barely sitting on the edge, and they were afraid that the barrels were going to fall down on me and crush me. I really think they was worried about the paperwork, but but you know, so yeah. But the one of the technicians was trying to adjust a light and bumped one of those old barrels. And that old barrel, those old barrels are half empty anyway. When he bumped it, all this dust and dirt came down. And when it came down across the camera lens, it looked like we were in a snow globe, just an old warehouse snow globe.
Huh.
And that's when I started talking about my dad. I went completely off script and didn't even realize I'd done it until I realized everybody was quiet. And I looked at AJ and I said, I'm so sorry. I said, I just went off script on this. I'm so sorry. He said, no, keep going.
Keep going. Yeah.
And he said, you know, Freddie, it's kind of like life. And what happened was we got caught up in documenting being with Jimmy Russell, being at Castle and Key, being out on the farm with Don, doing this stuff. And he says, we were piece parts. And he said, we realized we didn't have a common tie of all these distilleries and all these different folks and how we all fit together on this earth and in this industry. And he said, keep going. And so that's actually how that came about. But they say there are times in your life when words will come to your mouth and you don't even know where they came from.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's what happened. And that's how they came about. So, yeah, so I go around, when I walk around, sometimes I just disappear and I'll just go walking and just putting the pieces together, and you have aha moments. If you've ever, I mean, you can go home, like you were just talking about going home.
Yeah.
How many times have you gone home and you remember looking at something in your house and saying, that's not how I remember it.
Right. Yeah.
But it's been there all along. You know, it's just, I don't know, maybe it comes with age, but sometimes we look beyond the obvious and it's been there all along.
Yeah.
Kind of cool. But yeah, so Buffalo Trace, playing around there, it used to be the steam locomotive came in there. They had 3 miles of railroad tracks around Buffalo Trace. So where the old Weller Bottling Hall is, that used to be the train depot. And they would stop there, and I could get on the train and I could ride around to the backside where the boxcars
Really?
dropped off the grain. Oh, hell yeah, man.
Oh, this was the ultimate playground. Yeah.
That was big doings back then.
I would have killed for that. Yeah, that's great.
Riding with the engineer, shoot. And then I could get up in the truck with the guys, because he used to have to drive, had to drive all the whiskey and stuff around the distillery in trucks and stuff at the time. But yeah, it was just fun, playing with the barrels, rolling the barrels. We used to play with how many times it would take to whack a bung to pop it up out of the barrel.
Right.
Now today, you go to the side show at a carnival and it's the whack-a-mole.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were a whack-a-bung. So we,
yeah.
But yeah, it's fun moments. And I try to, when I do tours with kids, I get them to play with stuff like that. If we can, I'll take a barrel and I'll show them how the barrel will roll and how they can spin it and how they can pop it and make it jump up on its head, or, you know, and they're fascinated with that. But it helps them to understand engineering and concepts and designs and why barrels are round instead of square. You know, they just laugh, but you plant seeds.
Right.
And that's just what you do, but you make it a fun moment. So,
You know, you and I,
Mm.
there's no bigger person in both of our lives than our fathers. And even with them being gone at this point, you know, they continue to have an impact on you. And, you know, you have to admit at this point, your father was right. And you go to work for Buffalo Trace as a commitment to your dad. You're doing it for your dad. Now, every day you go to work, you're doing it for Freddie because you take inspiration from all the people that you interact with. And in reality, your dad was right for having you go to Buffalo Trace, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's kind of fun. And the kicker though is my mom.
Hmm.
You just talking about your going home and with your mom.
Yeah.
My mother worked for another distillery, so my mother worked for National.
Did.
She was
Okay. I did not know this.
very religious. She did not drink, but she had a nose, and that was just out of this world. And so she knew all of the different whiskeys on the bottling line. By smelling them, she could tell what they were when they came down the line. So we got into a lot of trouble because every time we were out drinking or something, she knew we'd been drinking it. We would try to put cinnamon in our mouths and all this kind of stuff. It didn't work.
It didn't work.
But so here's my mom. My mom grew up in the mountains. So on my dad and my granddad's side, I'm from Buffalo Trace. But on my mother's side, I'm from Breathitt County, Jackson, Kentucky. And my grandfather on her side mined his own coal, and his buddies ran moonshine stills out of his coal mine.
Huh.
So that little trick that I do is called waking the dog, where you smack your hands and rub them.
Yeah.
And smell them. That was what I learned from them. When they were fooling around with their whiskey, if they were getting whiskey from somebody else, they didn't drink it first because they didn't know what they were getting into. So they would smack their hands, and they could go through this process, and it would tell them the strength. It would tell them the dominant grain. It would tell them the kind of yeast that they were using, and it could tell them the proof coming off the still by the residuals that you get on your hands. And if you bring your bourbon off the still at a lower proof, it feels like you put lotion on your hands.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. And so I learned that from them. And so I was just fooling around down at the distillery one day, and I did it. And somebody was like, "Whoa, where did that come from?" And like my dad used to tell me, I said, "Oh, hell, everybody up in the mountains knows that." You know, it's like, but it caught on, and you can't do it once the bourbon's gone into the barrel. But coming off the still, you can differentiate the difference between a vodka, a bourbon, and a whiskey just by doing that when it comes off the still. It's really cool. It's really cool to do. So yeah. So mom was in there. She didn't want to work at the distillery with dad because she just didn't want to be bothered with him all day long. So
right. You need a little break in there, right?
Yeah.
Have your a little different time. So yeah, that's okay.
But I got to balance the both. So I got the religious part from my mom, and I got the whiskey making from my dad. But there in the end, my dad, he started going to church. He wouldn't sit real close to her. My mom liked to shout.
Uh-huh.
So that was the only problem with it. I had to sit between my mom and my dad in church. And I knew when the pastor said certain things, when I saw her hat come off the top of her head, I knew it was time to duck.
Right.
So but it was a balanced background. And I think that maybe it's missing today, but you look back and you think of all these crazy things that happened to you and things that you did with I don't want to get off on this, but you were talking about things that you do with your parents.
Right.
I remember one time, so my dad decided this tree in the backyard was dying. And he said, Freddie, we need to cut that tree down. And I said, okay. So we get out there and we're taking turns swinging the axe and we're chopping and all that. And he's looking and he said, cool, it ought to be coming down. He said, but it's not moving. He said, and I don't want it falling over on the shed or on the rabbit house over here. He said, we got to make it come right down through here. He said, but I don't know what's going on. He said, it's not doing what it should do. He said, here. He said, let me go get a rope. He said, what I want you to do is, he said, climb up in the tree.
Oh, geez.
And go up there and tie the rope, put a good knot in it. he says, and then what we'll do is we'll pull on it. And as I'm pulling on it, you can chop a little bit more and we'll make it fall where it needs to fall. Hey, it's my dad.
Right.
Okay, Dad, I'm trusting you, Dad. So I climb up the tree with the rope, right? And he said, you might want to go a little bit higher. I said, we'll get the leverage right. Go a little bit higher. Okay, I go a little bit higher. A little bit more, son. Go up a little bit more there. I said, okay, Dad. So I'm up there and I'm tying this knot. And all of a sudden I realized I'm moving. And I look and my dad's down there pulling on the rope. I'm like,
with you up there?
Like, yeah, I'm still in the tree. And I'm like, this is not going very well at all. Right. And so I do not know what made me climb. As the tree's falling over, something told me to go climb around on the side of the tree, on the top part of the tree.
Yeah.
So that at least when it hits the ground, I won't get crushed, right?
Right.
So the tree comes over and that tree, those limbs threw me out of there like I was in a slingshot or something. And the next thing I know, I'm rolling across the ground. And when I land, I'm looking up and my dad's standing down there looking at me. I said, what just happened? He said, I figured while you was up there, I would test the knot to see if it would hold. And he said, and the next thing I know, here you come down on the ground. And I'm like, okay, I just learned something about my father. I'm going to take both ends of the rope up the tree with me. So we laughed about that. But those points in your life, those are memory moments.
Yeah.
They're, at the time, they're crazy as they can be, but later on you look back and you realize those were moments that I spent with my dad that I would never give anything for. And they happen because you're with people. And I don't know how to explain it, but we do the same thing when we get together with people. And we get to laughing, and even if it's a good bottle or whatever. And how many times have you been there laughing and joking and telling stories, and all of a sudden you realize, damn, the bottle's empty. And then somebody says, well, look at the time. And you realize for that brief moment, you were so wrapped up with
nothing else mattered
with those folks that time was not even a factor in your life.
Yeah.
And that to me is the ultimate compliment of being able to spend time with friends and opening up a bottle that you've been trying to save. And it's something magical that happens with it. And I stopped saving my bottles, except that one that you signed. And I'm still committed to that one. Yeah. I'm still committed to that one. So, but yeah. And Barry gave me one. That we're gonna do something with that. I've got a commitment. I got some folks coming into town, and I'm gonna open it up with Barry, and we're gonna have some fun with that.
Nice. Freddie, I do want to ask you about a couple other family members, because it's people in your life that you talk a lot about, but not really get into the story. So the first one being your grandfather. What kind of man was he?
I did not know all that he went through.
Mm-hmm.
So Granddad had become, because of he and Colonel Blanton had met on the riverbank as kids, throwing rocks in the rivers, and they became friends. And so when Colonel Blanton started to work at the distillery, he invited my grandfather to come in and work with him. And he did not show favors with my grandfather. So the Scottish and Irish that had built those warehouses and stuff shared with him a lot about how they were built. And they kind of like took him in. And because of, I tell people all the time, history is baggage. I never forget who I am or my origin. But because of history, there was a plantation down below the distillery, and Colonel West fathered a couple of kids. And one of the offsprings of that was my grandfather. So he didn't look like an African-American. He looked more like an old vineyard guy. He had this really pretty, leathery kind of a skin. He had this nice silver flow. I used to look at him and like, damn, that's my grandfather. He's pretty cool. But because of that, he was accepted socially in the whiskey world. And so he became the first African American to be the manager of a major warehouse, a major distillery. He was responsible for 250,000 barrels of whiskey.
That's
And he kept
amazing.
up.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, and he kept up with them on a paper ledger.
Yeah.
I'm like, and so, but when I would talk to him and I'd spend time with him, none of that stuff ever came up. And so I remember things that happened, and he said, yep, he says, but that just goes with the territory. He said, you can't focus on the negative stuff. He says, because if you do, it'll get you down. But Colonel Blanton would address those issues. And if people refused to do something or do a job that was an assignment associated with what Granddad had asked them to do, they would say, okay, well, they had this one guy, was a new guy that was hired on. And he said, well, I'm not taking any orders from him. And so they said, oh, well, you go up to the office and maybe they can find something else for you to do. And so they would say, oh, really? They said, well, what seems to be the problem? I said, oh, I'm not taking any orders from him. And they said, oh, well, I guess maybe you need to go work somewhere else.
Yeah. That's cool. You had that support. Yeah.
And so, and I'm like, I never knew that they were going through that kind of stuff because they never brought it home.
Didn't bring it home. Yeah.
Nope.
That's something they had to deal with, but didn't bring it home. Yep. And it didn't jade them on just the human population. It's just those individual idiots, that are that way.
Yeah. So it's really kind of cool. So, but that was one of the things that, so when we started this, so he and my dad, basically they call them the yard folks. So you start with the nits and grits, some of the dirtiest jobs and things like that. At one point, my dad was filleting fish for Colonel Blanton and doing some other stuff, taking care of his roosters and stuff. And somebody else that worked down there, one of our team members in the gift shop at the time, he's passed away now, but he was joking with someone else about it. And said, oh, yes. I said, yeah. He just said, oh, Jimmy's over there. He's cleaning fish and trimming off the roosters. And I overheard them. And when I came by, they stopped talking about it. But I went home and I asked my dad. I said, Dad, what? And I said, they were talking about some stuff that you were doing down there. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, what was that all about? So his comment to me was this. He said, Freddie, he said, I had a family. He says, my responsibility was to take care of you, to raise the family. And he says, and sometimes in this life, sometimes in the world that we live in, you are given tasks to do that are dirty, that are messy, but they look to see how you do them. I said, where are we going with this? And he said, well, it's kind of like this. Sometimes people want to know if I really get into trouble, if I get in a ditch, will you climb down in the ditch and help me get out? And he said, so sometimes the dirtiest, messiest job, or a job that most people would prefer not to do, they look to see how you will do that job, because that's where your integrity comes from. And they know that if you'll do that job, and you'll do a darn good job at that, these other things are a piece of cake.
Yeah.
And so he said, whatever you do, he says, always make it your best. Always make it your best. And that's what will get you through. And that was what was going on. So if you talk to Harlan, who is the master distiller now, and if you talk to Josh and you talk to Dylan, if you come down there on certain days, those guys are dirty. They're messy. They have been in the trenches, in the ditch, all right? And they're doing the same thing that Harlan went through when he came through. And it's like, we got to know, you got to understand all the piece parts. And some of the piece parts in making whiskey are not
glamorous.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Right.
It's not glamorous at all.
Right.
And so, but you have to understand, if something does go wrong and you got to get out there and figure out what's wrong, you have to know. And the only way you're going to get there is to get down there and get dirty and messy and make it happen. And that's what those guys have been doing. And when I'm taking tours, I'll let people meet them and talk to them, and they get an appreciation for what it really takes to be committed to making good whiskey. It's a cool thing. So yeah, I get off on that. It's because they never shared with me some of the things they went through until I got down to the distillery and I started talking to some of the other guys that used to work with them. And late in life, my dad would sit around sometimes and he'd just be sitting there and we'd be watching TV or listening to the news. We'd have a bourbon, have a little drink. And he might be quiet, 10 to 15 minutes, just nothing, not saying anything. And all of a sudden he would come out with something. And I would look at him, I said, Dad, where did that come from? He said, oh, I never mentioned that to you. I said, no, Dad, that's the first time I've ever heard it. He said, oh, it's just one of those things. I never thought about it much. And you realize, golly, all the things that if you talk to older folks and you think about all that they went through, and now they're still here, and you think about technologies, think about our lives, and it makes you feel good to see some of these old folks. I mean, my daughter gives me a rough time about trying to even fiddle around with my own damn phone, but just a lot of times I'll get my phone, I'll be trying to do something, and she said, "Give me the phone." Just give me the phone. And she said, "You're really messing things up," and then we laugh about it. And
Right.
you realize we just had a memory moment.
Yeah.
So
another family member I want to ask you about, because I know, just you touch on him in a lot of your stories, but is your brother. Tell us a little bit about your brother and what type of person he was.
My brother, there were a group of kids, Kentucky State University, with this Rosenwald program. My brother was part of a kind of like an elite group. They were genius. They had already been tested in scholastic and all, but they were geniuses. And they were in this category. My brother was smart. I mean, really, beyond what I would consider pretty cool. He was really smart. He even dropped me on my head. So that set me back a little bit. But the deal was, he was brilliant. And he always would tear things apart. I mean, he was always busy trying to find out how do things work. And he also would get into stuff. So he would do things like, if we were told to, when it's time, they're called Shelly beans. If anyone knows about farming, you let the beans dry on the plant step on the stem, and then you take them and you crush them up, and the pods break open, and you got the little Shelly beans. All right, the beans come out. So our job was my dad gave us this assignment. This is an example of my brother. It was my brother, my sister, and I, and my dad would mark off parts of the garden that we were supposed to take care of. So it was Shelly bean time. So he had marked off this section, and our job was, when we got in from school, was to go out there, take these beans and shell and bring the little beans out of the pot. And so my brother says, gosh, I tell you what, y'all go pull up the beans, pull up the plants, and bring them over here on the back porch. And I've got an idea. My brother, my father had just bought a big window fan. Okay. Paid a bunch of money for this thing. And my brother says, okay, now here's what we're going to do. He says, I've got this fan, I've taken it out of the window, and we're going to sit it here on the porch. And I want y'all to start stamping up and down like you would crush wine. He said, I want y'all to start jumping up and down on the bean pods. Just start jumping up and down on them. And what we're going to do is I'm going to turn on this fan, and the fan's going to blow all the bigger pieces away. And the beans will be left right here on the porch. And my sister and I look at each other, and I'm like, I said, Crick, I don't think this, his nickname was Crick. I said, Crick, I said, I don't think this is a good idea. He says, trust me, you got to understand the principles of all this. He says, this will work. So y'all start jumping up and down on the beans. Right? So my sister and I, we start jumping up and down on beans. He kicks this big window fan on. It blows everything blows, it blows everything out in the yard. The fan falls over. He bends the blades on the fan. The fan's still trying to run. And I'm like, oh my God, this is a mess, right?
Right.
So now we've got beans all over the back of the yard. We've got a fan that's busted up. Dad's getting ready to come home from work. I'm like, this is not going to be pretty. My dad comes, that's the worst whipping I've ever gotten in my life. He bent up the fan. My brother tried to fix the fan back. It was
Someone, is that Jim there? Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
But
Sorry.
anyway, so that was my brother. So he would do things like this. So then we found out where Dad keeps his stash of bourbon. Another bad moment. And so he said, look, I know where Dad keeps the good stuff. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, come here. He said, here's how we do it. You know, we're going to take a sip. And he says, then we're going to fill it back up with tea from in the kitchen. I'm like, really? He said, yeah. He said, trust me. He said, Dad's been marking the bottle. So he knows it. See, my brother had already been hitting Dad's whiskey. And so Dad started marking the bottles to know how much was in there when he would pour from them. And so Crick, when we would drink, Crick would then fill it back up.
Right.
To the mark again with tea. He said he'll never know the difference. All right, you ready for this?
Yeah.
So my brother turns 21. This is one of Dad's really good barrel proof bourbons because they would tap into the barrels and stuff. So you get what they call a quick dump.
Okay.
And that meant when your buddies did a quick dump, because then you could just buy the whole barrels and bring them home. So a quick dump meant that they're going to bring the barrel up before all the whiskey's out of it. So you could get about like a gallon or so of whiskey out of it if you did a quick dump.
Aha.
Oh yeah. and so Dad had these bottles. And so Crick had discovered this. And so we'd drink from them. And Dad would have these lines. So when my brother turned 21, Dad said, he said, Jimmy, he said, this is one of the really good bourbons from down at the Distillery. And he said, and I've been saving it for you. He said, because I want to give it to you for your 21st birthday. And my brother looked at it, and it was the bottle that we had been hitting. And my brother says, he said, Dad, I don't want that. And he says, why? And he said, well, Dad, it's not really full of bourbon. And my dad said, I know that too. He says, but here, it's your present. Oh, it was crazy. So, but he would, it was interesting to see how he thought. I mean, he was a great guy. He used to go into when they first started doing hip implants. He worked with Roche, and he was the one that would go into the operating room with the surgeons and show them how to insert those hips and drill into the bones and stuff like that. Brilliant guy. I mean, that was him. And then he became terminally ill, and it kind of messed him up. But I ended up taking care of him also. So he came home with my dad, and they both passed away. He actually passed away before my father did. So I ended up moving into the house with the two of them to take care of him. But all along the way, he would always, instead of just doing the work, he would always come up with a creative way of doing it easier or faster. And it was always a mess. It just never worked out. So, but yeah, right. So that was my brother. But I was amazed at his brilliance. When you get around folks that they know more than you, that's when you just shut up and listen. So I would just listen to them. But my brother, Jimmy Brown, his father, Leonard Coach Brown they call him Wawa Brown. He was the basketball coach at Kentucky State. Dr. Exum, Henry Exum was his son, and John Demery was the other. Those were the brilliant minds of Frankfurt for the African American community, and they all went. I mean, they all had tremendous careers and moved away from here. It was just, I don't know. I always often wondered about how do people get so smart?
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. But
Yeah.
that's where bourbon comes in. See, bourbon makes you smarter.
It does.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to yourself, you think you're doing pretty good. So the more you drink, the smarter you get. You know that.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I can drink myself to Einstein. So
Oh yes,
yeah, I can get there.
Oh
So,
gosh.
all right. Well, what we're going to do next, we'll take a quick break. And then when we come back, we're still going to be talking to Freddie Johnson. We got some more stuff we want to ask him about. We'll get to that in just a few.
Today's show is sponsored by the ABV Network Challenge Coin, the third in our series of the yearly challenge coins in the shop right now and ready to order. Get yours by heading over to abvnetwork.com and selecting shop from the menu. We are also sponsored by Moonshine University. Moonshine University offers programs to assist individuals in the bourbon industry or simply fans wanting to step up their knowledge. Whether you're looking for in-person learning in the classrooms of Moonshine University or looking for self-study online, there are options to fit your unique needs. Check them out at moonshineuniversity.com.
All right, everybody, welcome back. We are here with Freddie Johnson. We're talking family, we're talking bourbon, but now we're going to talk something else, Freddie. Soda. Tell me about how this soda thing got started. This is amazing to me.
Oh, this is my little favorite buddy here. Let's see if I can get it up here. There we go. So it started off, the distillery had a product called Dr. McGillicuddy's root beer.
Mm-hmm.
And we were, I mean, because we're family focused, what happened was the kids, it worked out great. They bought the McGillicuddy line and the root beer came with it. But it didn't really have a fit other than being something for the kids to enjoy when they came in off of the tour. And so they had looked around at the stuff that I'd done around here, and we were joking about it one day, and I was talking about how we used to have these Sunday dinners, and they were called basket dinners at the church. And one of the things that they would do is you'd get these big tubs of ice, and they would put the sodas in there, and then while the sodas were cooling down, getting ready for the dinner, the kids got a chance to make ice cream. So we'd get over there. I think that's really why they had us around there.
Right, the labor. Yeah.
But
I remember when they had those too. And when you're a kid, it's kind of fun, you know. It's,
and you'd have to put the salt around there to get the ice, so it get really
pack
cold
the ice and the
that.
salt. Yep.
So you'd make a big thing of ice cream for the church. So when the church let out, you'd have this ice cream, you'd have the root beers, and you could make root beer floats. And so I was talking about that one time, and they said, how would you feel about us naming the root beer after you? With your kid, being the kid around here at the distillery and all of that, and kind of like, how would you feel about that? And I was like, well, is it going to be any good? I mean, what are you getting ready to do here? I don't want something out there with my name on it. They go, God, have you tasted that root beer from that's terrible. And they said, no. They said, it's going to be what we call a clean label. Well, I didn't even understand the term.
Right.
And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, a clean label means that there's no artificial preservatives or additives or anything like that in it. And I was like, oh, that sounds pretty cool.
Right,
so that made my daughter happy because I actually got my grandkids and my daughter involved with tasting the recipes as we were making them. And they were part of the approval process. So we're going to be doing a group picture with the chemist over in the lab that basically she did the configurations on, so the root beer, the ginger ale, and the ginger beer are all recipes and stuff that were created, the flavors and all that. So it's real birch oil. So when you take a sip of it, you can actually, just like when we do a bourbon, you can the mouthfeel, the viscosity, you can feel a good bourbon in your mouth.
Yep.
If you take the root beer and you do a sip of it, you can actually feel the birch oil coating the inside of your mouth. The vanilla is imported in from Madagascar, and it's real cane sugar. So that started it. And then they did the same thing with the ginger ale. So it's a real ginger root, cane sugar, once again, the same thing. And then the ginger beer takes it to the next level. And there's another root that you can use that goes with it. And that's what causes the frothiness that gets created when you make a cocktail.
Yeah.
So that's what's in there. And that's where it creates a citric kind of a flavor. And so that's part of what's going on. So these things got created. And Fred's on here with me. He can attest to what happened. So the perception was when they decided to do this, that Freddie was about to become rich and famous. Okay? and they didn't get it at all. So what was actually going on was this. Steve, just like what you and Stephanie are doing. We all walk this earth, but what do we leave behind once we're done?
Right.
What's our legacy? And so a lot of times we walk this earth and we leave and we've left nothing behind. There's nothing that says that, nothing tangible. So I got involved with the Green Hills Cemetery because my great grandfather, who was born a slave, and he married Melissa Wilson, who was a Blackfoot Indian. I didn't even know about Blackfoot Indians. But those were slaves that escaped, and the Indian tribes would take them in. And if they were accepted and they had family, they had kids, the kids were not Native Americans and they weren't African Americans. And so they were called Blackfoot Indians. They were dark complected Indians. And that was what we called her Mud, Melissa Wilson. That was what she was. But they're all buried up in this old pauper cemetery. And the Confederate and Union soldiers are buried up there, but they're African American. It's one of the 4 distilleries that African Americans are recognized as that have fought for the Union or the Confederacy. So, but they're in wooden coffins, and the coffins started collapsing in. And I was up there with my dad, and he was showing me where everybody was buried. And I was like, well, what's all this? And I said, all these little divots. And he says, oh, those are people that didn't get a headstone, or they committed suicide during the Depression, and they brought them up here and buried them because they didn't have any money and nobody took care of them. And he said, those are just bodies over there. And I was like, oh, wow. So things were starting to fall apart, and a bunch of us got together and we started trying to restore the cemetery. And one of my cousins had kind of tried to kick this thing off, and she passed away. And so we were like, okay, let's give it a shot. So we started working on it, and the distillery found out, Mark Brownlee found out about what I was doing. And they said, well, why didn't you come ask us? And I said, well, I didn't want to ask for a handout at the distillery that I work at. I said, they said, no, we're going to help. We're part of the community. And so a lot of the employees, their families are buried in that cemetery, and I didn't even know it.
Mm-hmm.
Always at Buffalo Trace. So what they said was, here's what we're going to do. We're going to come out with this soda line, and we're going to help you restore the cemetery. And that's how I got started. And so a part of the proceeds from the Freddie soda line actually goes to a special historical restoration 501c3 that we've gotten established. And that money allows me to help fix up the cemetery. So it's my legacy. So when I tell my daughter, my grandkids, what I was about to get involved in and how I'll be able to direct these funds to restore different pieces of the cemetery. And once we get it restored, I'll be able to help other historical sites. So as long as the Freddie soda, ginger ale and ginger beer and the cream soda, which is going to come out, as long as these sodas exist, there will be a fund that those monies will be able to be directed towards historical sites to restore them back to the way that they were. And it's my legacy moving forward that just says that I did something.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
It is. And it's something like that to come up, but you know what I see with that, and it just has to be Freddie Johnson, the person. Your face is on there, but that's not all it is. It's not like a a celebrity brand where you're just slapping it. You're so involved from every part of that. Recently participated in an event where you talked about the soda and what goes into it. And you didn't even get into all that, but I mean, every ingredient that's on that label, you made sure that that's, something that is, an all natural ingredient, and you researched it, and you studied it, how to do a proper soda tasting and a cocktail, how to make the cocktails properly with the sodas. You don't do anything, half speed. You have to go full blown, all out. And it's amazing, Freddie.
I was that pesky kid. The kids that get on your nerve. I mean, all of us out here, you've had a child, you had somebody's kid, if it wasn't your own, that just got on your nerves because, what are you doing now? How you do that? And
Right.
sometimes you go like, oh my God, here comes that kid again. Pretend you're busy. Don't make eye contact, because you make eye contact, then he's got you. And so, but it's contagious. It's contagious. So even when they did this, Steve, even the 6-pack, if you get a 6-pack of the root beer, Cornet is the one that came up with this, the design, the graphics and stuff.
Right.
But it shows me riding on the buffalo on the water tower. It shows me in the truck. It shows me saying, "Hey, Daddy-O," and all this kind of crazy stuff. But you look all around it, and the kids notice this stuff. So I'm down there one day, and this little kid comes out. You remember that Mean Joe Green commercial where he throws the jersey,
throws the jersey to the kid. Yeah.
Right. So I'm down there one day, and they get the root beer. The kids get the root beer at the end of the tour. So this little kid liked the root beer, and so he'd gotten his parents to get him a 6-pack of the root beer. So as he's going, they're heading out the door. They're leaving out, and the little kid looks up. And he looks at the bottle, and he looks up, and he looks at the bottle, and he said, "Dad, that's him. That's him." And so the father looks at me, and he looks at the kid, and I said, "Did you like the root beer?" And he's like, "Oh yeah." And he said, well, Mr. Freddie, he said, "Would you sign my bottle for me?" And I'm like, "Sure, I'll be glad to sign that bottle for you." I said, I'm touched, I'm honored. So just as I'm starting to sign this bottle of root beer, Harlan Wheatley, the master distiller, comes walking by. Now, normally we're signing bottles of bourbon and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And he looks, and there I am signing this bottle of root beer, and he just shakes his head and says, "I've seen everything now." I said, "Now we're signing root beer bottles at Buffalo Trace." But you ready for this? I got the nicest note back from the parents. And they said that he talked about that for the rest of their trip. And that's why what Royce did, and that's why many of you have done the same thing. It's the little things like that that make this journey worthwhile. And at the time, it's no big deal to you. It's like Royce was talking about. It's no big deal at the time to you. But for that person at that moment, that might be something that they needed to get them past a little rough spot in the road. So that's why I think people come to the distillery. You got 2 different groups coming to a distillery. You got the folks that are the whiskey nerds.
Oh, yeah.
But you also have the ones that are just looking for a moment to just not think about all the other baggage that they've got, and just to have a fun time and have a drink and laugh and be with friends and folks that maybe they don't even know, but they end up meeting and chatting, and all of a sudden a whole nother group of folks get together, and here we are. But yeah, so that whole soda thing, it's taken off, and that's coming up next. So we're waiting for the COVID thing to go away. We're under restriction right now, but we've got folks all over the country that want us to come out and do Freddie root beer soda tasting.
Kind of like the
events.
class like I went through. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
If they get that going, and Freddie comes to your town, sign up for that event. It's fascinating. He shows you different ways to make the cocktails and how if you pour it the right way, it'll be better. And it's fascinating stuff. And everything Freddie tells you is right. I mean, you go through it. It's cool. I mean, it really is.
Oh, Melanie's like looking like she said, I don't know about
She's like,
everything.
I don't think about that. He's making this up, but no, it's absolutely true. It's
Oh
true.
gosh.
Freddie,
Oh,
just a couple personal things because I wanted to again make this a little bit different. And I know I don't want to keep you too long, but the first one is: do you have any hobbies outside of bourbon? You're big into whiskey. Is there anything else? Now, obviously, you're doing some great work with the cemetery. That's probably takes some of your time. Is there anything else you're into? You collect anything? Is there things you like to do? Anything like that?
yeah. So it's, I guess you call them life-changing events. So a bunch of my buddies and I, we would fish. Well, I guess at the time we were fishing everywhere from this part of Kentucky all the way down through. We'd go to Rodman Reservoir down in Florida, over into Mississippi, Alabama. We were fishing Georgia, West Point Lake. I mean, we were fishing all over the southeastern part of the United States, and we did that. We did that every year for I guess maybe almost 15 years. And then, life starts to change and your groups get smaller.
Yep.
And you travel less. And now the other burdens of life come in. And so then what happened to me was when my dad's health started to fail, and I'd become his caregiver, it's like, okay, now I've got two choices. I could go on this trip, but is that really where I want to be?
Right.
And so your life starts to change. And so now there are only two of us left. And my buddy that we used to fish with, he lives here in Lexington with us. And we've made a vow that we're going to start fishing again. And we're just going to shift gears and kind of redirect our priorities and get back to doing some things that we used to like to do. But fishing, I love to travel. I started traveling. I used to cut grass during the week, just so that I could make enough money that I would get on a Greyhound bus to see how far I could go on a round trip ticket with the money I made. I drove my parents crazy with that. And what I would do, because they wouldn't know where I was.
Right.
I would just go. And so my mom was the one that kind of like, she said, I tell you what, she said, do this for me. She said, if you have a town that you're getting ready to go to, she says, if we have family in that town, she said, try to make it a town that we have family in. And she says, I want to give you the phone number of somebody there in that town. And she says, and go visit them. She said, go visit them while you're there. And I'm like, hey, this is pretty cool. So it was her way of letting me, she knew I was a free spirit. It was her way of letting me do that, but still making sure that I was okay so that they didn't worry about me. But I mean, you can't do that today. I mean, gosh, Lord have mercy. If you try to get on a Greyhound bus and go somewhere now by yourself as a kid,
Right.
well, first off, the police are going to get you because you're not supposed to be out there by yourself because you're only a child. But you could do stuff like that. And I just looked at the world differently. But yeah, so I like to travel. We a couple of us went out to Lake Powell. We rented a houseboat and we took a week and we just did nothing but take the houseboat, go up into these different canyons and kick back, drop those anchors, and we'd sit there and we'd sip on hooch and we'd have some cigars and we would just look at the sky at night and we'd fish for stripers in the daytime and that's what I do. So I do that. And here lately, I'm starting to travel again. I'm just waiting for COVID to let me loose. But I've got this little network of places all over the United States that folks have already committed that once I start this circuit, I have to stay at each of these places, and we've all got a bottle that we're supposed to take a sip and a drink from. But I'll be traveling again, and they like to fish and they like to do a bunch of other stuff also. And so we're just I'll be doing that. So I'm hoping that I'm hoping that my journey ends on a happy note. But I'm looking at Rick up there, and I see the palm trees in the background, and I see the waves coming in, Rick, and yeah. So Margaritaville, but yeah, so the guy that plays for Jimmy Buffett, he was just down at the distillery. He popped in down there, and he said, "Now don't forget, you said you was going to come visit." And so so I'm looking forward to
do some travel.
Yeah.
I know Molly Wellman. She's a good friend of mine too. And if we were going to her place, and she's the world's greatest bartender, you got to have a cocktail. So if you're going to order a cocktail, what cocktail would you get?
I want to tell you something. I want to tell you the craziest thing in the world. So Molly,
she's amazing, by the way. It's her birthday as we record this. So if you're watching this, Molly, happy birthday.
Yeah. Here we go. All right. So we did this event, and she made old fashions. And she made them she called them seasonal old fashions, an old fashioned for each season of the year.
Wow. How talented is she?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And so I enjoy being with her. So I mean, she's just cool. She is really a nice lady. And so even with the COVID thing, she was talking about what she was going through with that and trying to keep her place going. And so that's one of my stops, because I want to go up there and check her out and visit her place and just have a drink with her and have her make me a cocktail at her bar.
Yeah.
So, Freddie should join us in July when a lot of us are
there. We're gonna be going there in July if you'd like to join us.
All right. So if they raise this barrier that they've got us under right now, I would be delighted to do that. So you just give me a heads up on that, Stephanie.
Okay, I'll give you the date. And we'll
absolutely.
That sounds good.
Okay.
So Freddie, last question I've got for you, and this is an important one. I think not only for me, but for bourbon fans everywhere. You are third generation Johnson family member, and I've been lucky enough to spend a little time with your grandson. When you went into the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame, I was there. I got to sit at your table. Your grandson was there, and what a smart young man he is. And you want a kid to do whatever a kid wants to do. You never want to say you got to do this job, but by gosh, I want him to work for Buffalo Trace. I want to have the fourth generation there. Please tell me that's in the works, baby.
Well, that's so Osiris is really pretty cool. So I don't like my dad was with me. I don't make him come down here.
Right.
But every now and then he'll say, "Is Papa, can we go down to the distillery and roll some barrels?"
Oh, cool.
Can we go down there and walk around? So when we did the 7 millionth barrel, and he got a chance to help me do that. And they've got this picture up. He's up there with Mark Brown and all of them, and Harlan. His little chest is all stuck out. Really. Now I'll show you how crazy this is. So Osiris is they call them high academic achievers,
right,
for Fayette County, and he has been one of the top academic achievers for Fayette County for the last 5 years. He is now on it's called the STEM program. So it's a bunch of these kids that basically are just so smart, and they have this special program for them, and they're just, doing crazy things with software, with math. I mean, he's really crazy at math and stuff like that, but chemistry and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're doing now is the reason for me getting a picture with him with Melissa in the lab is because of all the stuff that goes on in the lab, and I wanted to see that and spend some time in the lab, and also with the software folks, with the IT group.
Oh, great.
Because that's where it is. But I'll let him roll the barrels, but he'll be able to see the other pieces of the distillery, and hopefully he'll make up his own decision on what he wants to do. And I'm hoping he'll come in on the co-op program once he gets into college.
Yeah.
That'll be the next piece.
Yes.
But yeah, he's already
listens to this, please offer him a job now. Get him set up. I want him to be there. I think it's important. It's important to us bourbon fans that there's a fourth generation.
Freddie, I can't remember if I ever told you this or not, but one of the coolest moments for me in bourbon so far. So Steve had invited me to come to, I was at when you got inducted into the Hall of Fame, and I went up into the Fraser History Museum afterwards just to look around and see everything. And I actually came up the stairs, like up into around where that old steel was, into the room where they have the glass tables.
Right.
And family's huge for me, but it was the coolest thing ever because it was only your family in there. There's nobody else in the place. And you were over there at the table with your grandkids, with your daughter, with everybody, and they were looking at you on that glass table.
Yeah.
And it was the coolest thing ever. I don't think I ever told you that, but I didn't even go in the room because I didn't want to hurt the moment. But I did stand back and look at it I know I called Steve afterwards, but it was the coolest thing.
And so that's what I was talking about, Royce. That's the after I'm no longer walking this earth, they can take their family and they can say, that was Papa. This is what I did with Papa. We were here, we did this. And it's hard to, it's unless you really get into it, it's hard. I mean, like for me, the pictures that they have of my dad and my granddad and things that they get around the distillery, and to hear people come up and talk about how they influenced their lives or how they did something, that's what makes you feel good about being on this earth. It's not something you solicit. It's when people come up and they tell you, just like what you just did. I mean, I did that because I was having fun with them. But it's a moment, and my daughter, they still talk about that kind of stuff. And I'm like, gosh, you know, I never expected it. I mean, I just came back to take care of my dad. And so to me, the ultimate is each of you spending time with this old fart talking about bourbon and whiskey and life. But to me, it's the ultimate compliment because you didn't have to do what you're doing. You didn't have to be here with us this evening, and you took the time to kick back and
hear some stories and family history. And yeah, it's amazing, my friend. And Hall of Fame, when you went in there that night, you sent me the world's greatest text and talked about how we are bonded for life after you made it in there. And it's true. There's a connection I've got with you that I don't have with anybody else on earth. And I love you, Freddie. You're just a great guy.
Listen,
I get emotional again. Here we go.
Now, I'm not sure if y'all know this, but were any of you involved with that petition that Steve sent out?
Oh yeah, I'm sure all their names are on there. Absolutely.
Lord, let me tell you what. I didn't know that this bird had done that. And so,
I didn't say anything. No, I just
no,
did. Yeah.
no. But somebody calls me and they said, "Freddie, have you been out on the internet?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Oh man, there's a petition out about you." And I'm like, "Oh gosh, now what's going on?" Petitions are never good. And I said, "You're kidding?" He said, "Oh yeah." I said, "No." I said, "There's a whole bunch of signatures on it." And I'm like, "What in the world is?" I said, "Now what have I done? I've really I'm really ticked somebody off." And then I found out that it's Steve, and Eric was the one Eric Wiseman was the one. He called me and he said, "Freddie," he said, "Can I talk to you for a moment?" And I'm thinking, well, this is not good. And I said, "What's up, Eric?" And I said, "Do you want a tour?" And he said, "No." He said, "This is about something else." He said, he said, you are familiar with this petition, right?" And I'm like, what the hell is with this petition? And so then I found out that it's him setting the stage for me being considered to be inducted into the Bourbon Hall of Fame. And Eric was calling me. He said, "Do you realize the significance of this?" And I said, "I don't even understand what's going on." And he says, "Well, let me just say it this way." He said, "For this to happen, this is a history-making event." He said, "Normally these are master distillers. These are people that are widely known in the industry for whiskey and all this." And he says, "You're going to be the first tour guide that's ever been inducted into the Bourbon Hall of Fame." He said, "Do you realize it?" And I'm like, I'm still trying to grasp that. And it was like, to me, even today, it's hard to imagine someone cares that much that Steve put himself on the line, really, because they could have gone belly up on you.
Well,
You know,
the KDA called me after that, and I thought they're going to sue me or something. I didn't know what was going. I mean, I've never talked to anybody with the KDA. They called me and said, "Hey, we see what you're doing, and it's kind of cool."
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, we kept on, but I was scared to death because I don't have any money to battle out with the KDA. I mean, come on.
It was crazy. And then, and at that session, when I thought when Shapiro actually supported what had happened, the cool part was, somebody had said, "Well, have you ever taken the time to think about how many lives tour guides and the limos and the visitor centers at in and around Kentucky? Do you realize how many lives are involved in the whole bourbon industry? It's not the product, because without all these visitors, without all these folks that are excited about what's going on in the industry, the whiskey would still be in the warehouses."
Right.
And so that's what came out of that, was all of a sudden we started looking at, you think about 300,000 visitors at Buffalo Trace, but if you think about the number of people that talked to about being at Buffalo Trace, and you think about the number, and they were telling us exponentially that goes into the millions.
Yeah.
And then you think about all the revenue that gets generated by them coming to Kentucky, and you think about the societies and the clubs and all this that get created, and they're like, this is a big deal. And maybe it's not just making good bourbon or making good whiskey. Maybe it's this emotional connection that Steve brought to the forefront and said, maybe we need to look beyond just the whiskey in the bottle, because there's a lot more going on. And that's what you bring to the table. And I'm not talking about Steve. I'm talking about the folks on the call with us right now, on this Zoom right now. And what Stephanie, every now and then Stephanie goes, she goes out to another world. I'm not sure where
I'm having internet issues. I'm still here.
Yeah.
He's having internet problems. Sure.
Yeah. But the deal is that they take something that could be drab and boring and not very exciting, and you bring life to it. You bring life to it. If you've ever been around Barry brings life to bourbon.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just looking, Royce just said that. I mean, it's like, I'm looking at these folks, and I'm looking at some of these names, and I'm like, gosh, I've seen these names before. And
Yeah.
you bring life to the product. So you make it just seems like she's like looking like, yeah. Right. But you do it, and you do it without realizing it, because it's contagious when you talk to people. They get pumped.
Yep.
And then they want to try something. And then next thing you know, they've got a bottle of something. They're coming to you and say, "Brian, have you had this one before?" And, "No, I haven't had." "Oh, you got to have some of this." And so all of a sudden they're coming to you. They're bringing something to you because you introduced them to something else. And it's just, I just feel really blessed to know that I think this world's going to be all right. And I think it's folks like us, like you, that are going to help it along the way. That's all.
Yep.
I'm just a happy little camper now.
Well, Freddie,
Steve,
this was amazing. This was really beyond our
Thank you.
expectations, and I'm so glad we allocated the whole show to you, because we really got into some great stories, things I hadn't heard before, despite all the times we've talked and things like that. So it was really cool. People probably want to continue to follow the journey. If they want to follow you on social media, where can they do that?
So we're still, I get back out on Facebook every now and then. I don't do too much. Somebody hacked into,
Yes, I want to talk to you about that. Royce's
Yeah.
wife Becca can help you out with that. I know you got your new account and it doesn't have your photo on all that. I said, hey,
Yeah.
somebody's got to help Freddie. She's like, yeah, I can help Freddie get him set up properly. If you need help, we'll get her over there and get you fixed up, because you see it coming on stuff and it's like Royce said, is this really Freddie? Because we knew your old account, and it's like, is this really Freddie? So yeah, you need some help there, man.
yeah. And so, and it really kind of messed up a bunch of stuff. So,
Yeah.
but they, evidently I can't even get the Google straightened out, because the Google account, they changed my information. And so when I try to put my code in, it doesn't take my code. It's just, I'm like, holy crap. So that's when my daughter said, all right, so we got to do some other things, Dad. So we're trying to do that. The problem that's really a nightmare for me is that now I'm getting all these friend requests in.
Right.
And it's like, when I hit the friend request, then they think that it's not me,
Right.
because they're saying, wait a minute, I'm already a friend of Freddie's. Why am I getting another request from Freddie? And because it doesn't show up the same way. And I'm like, oh, so now I don't respond to those. I'm trying to figure out I'm still trying to figure out how do I get around that without just going out and punching, will you be my friend again? They're like, well, hell, I'm already your friend. And so now I get these questions and say, Freddie, I just got another friend request. And so now Facebook has got all this big list of, you got all these friend requests out. What? And I'm like, I don't have time to
So
go through all this
frustrating.
stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and whoever did it, the crazy part about it is I think this one person told me that I think they call them trolls, but whoever did it, that put out this first little negative comment that started all this. When I tried to find out who they were, there's nothing. You just got a blank screen, the image of a person, but there's no way you can find out who it was. And that really makes you mad. That
Who would do something like this to Freddie Johnson? If the bourbon community finds this person, look out. It's horrible.
Yeah. But
horrible.
I think that's just the world we live in now. So I
Unfortunate.
try to go like I would much rather have an evening like this,
Right.
than to spend my time worrying about who that jerk was that did this to me, because it tells me that issue is bigger than Freddie.
Yeah.
For them to do that, and so we've just got to move beyond that. And it's like, I hope that at some point, those of you that are on this, we get a chance to go over to Mr. Bill's and
share some of that stuff.
He'll open some bottles for us.
Yeah.
But yeah, so at some point, as we start to move around, I'll start saying where I am, and Steve will do some of that stuff, like checking out Molly and stuff like that.
Yep.
If we're at some events and things like that, and we'll raise a glass together and do it in person. I would love to do that.
Absolutely. All right, McNew, how about you? People want to follow your journey. Where do they need to go?
You can find me on Instagram at McNew ABV.
All right, for me, I'm an easy guy to find at Steve Akeley on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. I've got a website, steveakeley.com. We've also got a company website. That's abvnetwork.com. Check it out, because everything that we do is out there. Previous shows, so maybe you want to hear some shows that we've done with Freddie in the past. Those are out there. You can search for them. Check them out at abvnetwork.com. McNew, anything else to say before we get out of here?
I'd like to remind the audience to please hit that subscribe button for Bourbon Sasquatch on YouTube, where all of our shows will be posted. And when you're watching an episode, please give it a thumbs up and leave some comments and share it. It helps new people find the show, which is very important to us. And be sure to listen to the Bourbon Talk Show interviews on the Bourbon Daily the week of July 19th through the 26th. And we'll be back for new shows starting in September.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Freddie. Really appreciate it.
Salute.
Freddie, fantastic.
Hello.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Our audience, we'll see you back in September for season 2. Take care.
Cheers,
Bye.
guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Delayed.
Thank you. That was awesome.